Hi there, I'm Julia Frodahl, and in this video, I want to talk about authenticity, what it is exactly, why it's important, and the ideas, behaviors, and coping strategies that commonly get in the way of it. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to like and subscribe below. That way you'll be notified when I post new ones, and it also helps me reach more people with these teachings. So to begin, I want to tell you a little story. In the early 1970s, an upholsterer arrived at the office of two cardiologists by the name of Friedman and Rosenman to reupholster the chairs in their waiting room. As the upholsterer inspected the chairs, he commented on the unusual way that most of the chairs were worn compared to most that he'd seen. It was unusual that the wear on nearly all of the chairs in this waiting room was consistently on the arms and the fronts of the chair seats. The cardiologists didn't think much of it at the time, but 5 years later, they made the connection as they began their formal research into the correlation between personality types and disease. Friedman and Rosenman developed the theory of personality types that you may have some familiarity with, the type A and the type B personalities. And they set out to show that people with type A personality traits run a higher risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, and other stress-related illnesses. This may seem obvious to us now, but it was controversial research at the time because the scientific and medical community was a long way away from understanding that emotions play a role in disease. It's still a long way away from that in general, but as more and more research comes in, the mind emotion somatic connection is becoming more and more accepted. And while these types were originally described as personality types, they're now more accurately referred to as behavioral patterns because we now understand that most personality traits are simply how a person copes with stress and how they learned to engage with the world at an early age. And these patterns, as opposed to personality traits, are changeable. In any case, a type A behavioral pattern is characterized by a constant feeling of working against the clock, a strong sense of competitiveness, a heightened fear of failure, and generally higher stress levels. Type A people tend to be highly self-critical and are always striving toward a goal. They rarely feel a sense of joy in their efforts or their accomplishments. There's often a significant imbalance between work life and personal life. They easily get wound up, are prone to overreact, and are impatient with delays and any unproductive time. Type A people tend to see the worst in others and are easily aroused to anger, bullying, and hostility. We could say that the nervous system of individuals in this behavioral pattern are stuck in the fight-flight mode. And so, how does this relate to the way the chairs were worn? Well, unlike other patients, the cardiac patients seemed unable to sit in their seats for very long. They tended to sit on the edge of the seat and leapt up frequently. They also seemed to be unable to hold still and more frequently wore out the arms of the chairs with their constant movement and fidgeting. Now, a few years later, in 1979, a doctor by the name of Lydia Temashuk conducted a similar research study on the correlation of certain stress coping patterns and cancer patients. The study was initiated by the then head of the melanoma clinic at UCSF because, like the cardiologist, he was picking up on certain personality traits and behavioral patterns in his patients. An expert in behavioral medicine and psychosocial oncology, Temashuk, found in short that melanoma patients were overwhelmingly nice. They were pleasant to a fault. They were unassertive and never complained, and they would go far out of their way to be accommodating, gladly changing their schedules to make time to talk with her so as not to disappoint her. They also seemed extremely worried about their disease progression, but not for themselves. They were worried about the effect it was having on others. This pattern was so prominent that Temashuk decided to devote all her time going forward to the study of the psychology of cancer patients, because at the heart of what she had discovered was a profound relationship between repressed emotions and the depression of the immune system, which is our first line of defense against cancer. She and other researchers have also found this behavioral pattern to be common amongst those who suffer from autoimmune diseases, ALS, and fibromyalgia. So her work led to the creation of a third personality type, now behavioral pattern, that we rarely hear about, the type C behavioral pattern. The type C behavior pattern is one of appeasing others, denying one's true feelings, and conforming to group or social standards. These personalities spend their lives trying to be accepted by others, spouses, parents, siblings, coworkers, friends. In fact, their very identities seem to be derived by how they are perceived by others in their lives. Temashuk described this personality type as out of touch with their primary needs and emotions. The coping strategy for this group is to keep their feelings under wraps, the polar opposite of the type A. Type C doesn't express anger and rarely acknowledges fear and sadness. They maintain a general facade of pleasantness, even under the most painful or aggravating of circumstances. They strive to please people they care about, authority figures, especially, even strangers. They are patient, unassertive, cooperative, and appeasing in social, family, and work relationships, as well as quite compliant with external authority. They tend toward automatic and compulsive concern for the emotional needs of others while ignoring their own. And they share a marked underlying conviction that they have to justify their very existence by doing for and giving to others. Now, as often the case, the healthy place that we want to find is that middle place between the extremes, between type A and type C, the type B. So the type B behavioral pattern is characterized by a more relaxed, patient, and easygoing disposition. Type B individuals tend to exhibit flexibility, low competitiveness, and a more laid back approach to life. They are tolerant of others, adaptable to change, and they're less driven by time pressure. Type B individuals generally experience lower levels of stress and are less prone to aggression. They work steadily, enjoy their achievements, and do not become too stressed when their goals are not achieved. They are more reflective, experience lower levels of anxiety, and display higher levels of imagination and creativity as well. To be clear, these categories of behavioral patterns, they exist on a continuum. They're not distinct containers, and a person's state can fluctuate. So while Friedman and Rosenman had identified the type A behavior pattern and its connection to the development of heart disease, Temashuk discovered its polar opposite, the type C behavioral pattern and its correlation with immune dysfunction. By the 1990s, their research and the research of many others brought a veritable revolution in the study of psyche and soma, the process whereby our thoughts and emotions create actual physiological change in our cells and organs had become successfully demonstrated scientifically. These changes can be health promoting or health limiting, and we, you and I, and many others are here to make sure they are health promoting through our beautiful inner work, our compassion practices, and our meditation practices, and things of this nature. Because these practices all positively impact our mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical well being, all the way down to the cellular level. So, I mentioned in the beginning that this video is about authenticity, what it is, why it's important, what gets in the way of it. So, let's define what authenticity is, and then we'll zoom in on the type C behavioral pattern and how to undo that, because those patterns are steeped in people pleasing and inauthenticity. So the word authenticity has its roots in the Greek word autos, or self, and it's very closely related to the word author and authority. To be authentic is to be the true author of an authority over one's own life. It is to be true to the self that arises from within, from one's own unique and genuine essence. It's a very intrinsic orientation as opposed to an extrinsic orientation. When we're authentic, we're also congruent, meaning our thoughts, words, feelings, and body language all align. The people pleasing tendencies that are characteristic of the type C behavioral pattern, so fawning, denying our own needs and feelings, and the perpetual compulsion to try to justify our existence through serving others. These behaviors tear us away from this genuine essence within, from our intrinsic orientation. Often they prevent us from even knowing what our own needs and desires are, right? Because if we're so caught up in securing our attachments to others by reading and meeting those needs, their needs, we'll lose touch with our own. At the heart of most type C behavior is a fear of abandonment or rejection. And as we discuss in my compassion program, belonging and connection is essential for the human being. These needs are literally wired into our neural circuits. And because of this, most of us carry at least a mild and healthy amount of fear of abandonment, judgment, or rejection within us. In fact, if we don't, there's usually some form of psychopathy present. But if in infancy or childhood we were rejected or abandoned in some significant way, or if we didn't have a secure and reliable attachment with our caretakers, this fear of abandonment can dominate our lives. It can make us so preoccupied with trying to secure an attachment to others that we just fail to do the work of attaching to ourselves. We might become masters at reading and anticipating the needs of others while remaining completely oblivious to what our own even are. We may even have learned that actively suppressing our needs was the way to ensure a connection, in which case, survival will become synonymous with inauthenticity. So the people pleaser is born. And these baked in tendencies can be really hard to change because they become part of a fundamental and even primal survival strategy, literally programmed into our nervous system. Our early caretaker attachments and the coping strategies we develop to try to maintain them become the template for how we try to maintain connections as adults as well. But at some point, the need for belonging begins to clash with another need, and that is the need for authenticity. Perhaps you're here watching this video because you're standing at the hub of that inner tension between belonging and authenticity. And so, if so, please know that as uncomfortable as it may be, this tension can be the force that pushes you beyond your own old coping strategies. In Jungian terms, this is what individuation is all about, shedding the false identities that we take up to be accepted by family and culture in order to discover and become who you really are from the inside. In the first phase of life, attachment and belonging is much more critical because we're physically and otherwise much more vulnerable. So, if a child's choice is between hiding their feelings and getting the care that they need, or expressing their feelings and not getting the basic care that they need, any child is going to pick the first option. But in the latter stages of life, as I said, authenticity becomes increasingly important. And we are more physically and hopefully otherwise a little less vulnerable. And so that internal battle ensues. One wants to free themselves from these patterns of inauthenticity. And then, unfortunately, one often finds that these patterns are just completely baked into their identity and they get stuck. Developed so early, these coping strategies become automatic programs of relating. They are not conscious choices. They literally get wired into our nervous system. And as the self develops, it gets wired into that self too. So these behavior patterns can feel like they're actually our essence and our nature, but they're not. They're only familiar programs. And while there are many reasons why changing ourselves deeply isn't easy, we are free to change. The tricky thing about many of the type C behavioral patterns is that these self denying patterns can very easily look like their healthy counterparts, such as compassion, grace, generosity, equanimity, and other admirable strengths. But the resemblance is only superficial. The latter do not require that we overstep, ignore, or suppress our own needs and feelings. Coming into that understanding is a large part of the work that we do in my compassion program, which I mentioned earlier as well. Probably the hardest parts of healing and becoming free, becoming who we really are. It's not the habits we have to let go of or some of the people we sometimes do have to let go of. It's actually letting go of the person you had to become to survive those early days. It's letting go of the identity that you built around what were merely coping strategies, which means for a time, you will probably have to exist in the liminal and very uncomfortable space of a very unclear identity, and that's okay. With steady, slow, and self compassionate work, you will find your essence. So, I'd like to give you three practical things you can work on to help you move from people pleasing and other type C behavioral patterns to authenticity. So, number one is to understand that all change starts with awareness. So, please don't undervalue this stage. Recognizing where our behavioral patterns no longer serve us and where they are, in fact, hurting us is indeed the first step to changing them. So simply start to become compassionately and non judgmentally more aware of when you are out of touch with your own needs and feelings, when you are denying your needs and feelings or not valuing them as much as you are valuing the needs and feelings of others. For this, I have three prompts that you might use as reflection points, maybe in the evening for a little while. So the first prompt is: was there a truth inside you today that you felt you couldn't express authentically or that you didn't allow? Something that you pushed away in one way or another. Just bring awareness to that. Number two, was there a moment today that you felt anxious or fearful of losing a connection? And if so, how did you handle that? Number three, was there any way today that you abandoned yourself or your values out of fear of being rejected or abandoned by another? These reflection prompts will help you start to notice what's going on within you earlier when the feelings are more subtle. They'll help you notice beforehand if you're about to stuff down a thought, feeling, or other authentic part of yourself. Later, you will do the work of learning how to express yourself more authentically, but becoming more conscious of when you are not is the first step, and it's an important step. Please keep in mind it's essential to be compassionate through your practice of coming into more self awareness. No judgment, no guilt, no shame whatsoever. Type C personalities are very prone to those things. Please try to abstain from that. So remember that these are not patterns you chose consciously. These are patterns that your unconscious, underdeveloped brain chose for you out of necessity to keep you safe. Use what you discover as a catalyst to shift self negating and self destructive behavioral patterns. Number two is to notice incongruence. And by incongruence, I mean when your words, actions, tone, body language, and your internal somatic experiences are not matching. So, for example, you were telling someone you're really upset with them, but smiling as you do it, and then wondering why they don't understand how serious the problem is, right? That's incongruence. Another common habit of incongruence is when a person offers a little laugh every time they say something serious or important to them, as if to say, no big deal, totally hurts, but no big deal, right? So look for behaviors like this and make a log, and then choose one habit of incongruence to work on breaking. Teach yourself little by little to not undermine a truth with an incongruent tone, laugh, or facial gesture. Practice this intentionally with the safest people around you first. And if it's an option for you, you might even ask if they will let you know if they notice you being incongruent, so long as you feel that they can do this with you lovingly. And lastly, I want to recommend that you acclimate yourself to the word no. No is a very uncomfortable word if we have a core wound of abandonment and rejection. And not only will we be afraid of hearing it and do everything we can to avoid hearing it, including doing nothing, taking no risks in our lives, not applying ourselves to anything, Not only do we do everything we can to avoid hearing it, we will also assume that others have a hard time hearing no as well. And so we won't say no to them when we need to or want to either. In other words, we'll project our own discomfort with hearing no onto others and will not give a clear no when a clear no is important and would, in fact, be kind because the truth is always kind. Right? Only when a person is given a truth can they make their own decisions based on what's true, right? We spend so much energy protecting ourselves and others from truths we think will be hard to hear. But the truth gives us clarity and direction. It's ambiguity and a lack of clarity that's confusing. When we say yes when we mean no, we're telling a lie. And we are denying the other person the opportunity to make their own choices based on a truth. We want to be able to say no and receive no with grace without interpreting it as a rejection of our being or fearing that another person will experience it as a rejection of their being. Right? So, those are three very specific and practical places to start. And I hope that's helpful. I hope what I've shared here has been valuable. There are a number of links below to related topics and resources that you might explore. Please comment below if you have any questions to ask or thoughts to share. And I wish you well.